I never wanted to stand there in the shadow of that old oak tree, hearing the faint tremor in my own breath as I looked at the house where it all began, the place that once felt like a sanctuary. My heart pounded with a heavy mix of anger and apprehension, that sour taste of regret lingering on my tongue, reminding me I had lost something precious long before I truly understood its value. They say every betrayal starts with a trickle of doubt, a tiny crack in the foundation, and yet I never thought I'd be the woman who discovered too late just how far a single crack can spread when left untended. Even now, as the memory of him flashed behind my eyelids, a fleeting image of the man I believed in, the father of my children, the man whose voice once whispered promises of forever, I couldn't shake the dull ache in my chest. If only I had listened sooner to the silence between us, that cold gap in our conversations that might have clued me in, instead of willfully ignoring every red flag because I was desperate to preserve the illusion of normalcy. Perhaps I wanted to be fooled. Perhaps I needed to be fooled. Or maybe I thought I was being strong by staying. These days, I can't entirely separate truth from self-delusion, but I can recount the painful steps I took, one by one, leading to that day when he brazenly invited me to his wedding, as if I were nothing more than some distant friend. Um, and that's precisely why I did what I did. Because after the lies, the manipulations, and the condescending pity from everyone who assumed I couldn't function without him, I needed to prove to myself, to everyone really, that I wasn't a victim but a person with strength lurking beneath my scars. When the invitation arrived, an embossed envelope with fancy lettering, I almost laughed at the audacity. He wanted me at his wedding. He, who never signed the divorce papers properly, who liked to use my name at times just to keep certain assets in limbo, who never told the new fiancé that his ex-wife was still, by every legal measure, the real spouse. I shook my head so many times that day, reading that invitation, letting the rage twist through my gut. I could practically hear his voice, that smooth, self-satisfied tone he used when he was certain he had everything under control. Back in the days when I was just the supportive wife, he acted like I was the background of his life story, never the centerpiece, never a star. He cast me aside once he got that big promotion, I recall, after which he started coming home later and spending more time with people who never respected me, who saw me as the dull domestic fixture that needed to stay quiet. Then came the rumors of an affair that turned out to be more than just rumors, all culminating in his abrupt departure and the filing for what I believed was a straightforward divorce. But straightforward was never his style. He thrived on confusion, illusions, half-truths. He had an uncanny knack for making sure everyone else was always just one piece of information shy of clarity, ensuring he retained a controlling edge. To think that he was now orchestrating a lavish wedding with a younger, flashier fiancé, while quietly ensuring that I'd never actually be free of him, was enough to drive me to the brink of madness. The children, our children, spoke to me in hushed tones about it, as though I might break if they said the wrong words. Mom, we don't want to choose sides, they'd say, or he says everything's settled, but we just want you to be okay. That paternal manipulation ran deep, and I could see how they were torn. I didn't blame them. He was their father, after all. They saw in him a paternal figure who could still charm them when he wanted to, promising gifts, visits to grand new places, new experiences I could never afford to give them on my modest salary. I worked then as an assistant in a small law office, ironically reviewing documents I never thought I might someday need for my own battles. I spent many nights poring over legal precedents, checking official records, and confirming what I suspected. He'd never filed the final paperwork. Technically, I remained the legal wife, and that gave me a spark of hope, a small kernel of empowerment that overshadowed the heartbreak I carried. I realized in that moment I held a weapon he overlooked, a hidden card he never bothered to guess I might use. I didn't hatch the plan instantly. I sat on it, letting the emotions churn. There were times I thought, perhaps I should do the gracious thing, sign on my end, finalize it quietly, let him go, and never look back. Let him marry the new fiance without drama. Let him feel he had won. But every time I considered that, I remembered the countless sacrifices I'd made, the times I'd set aside my own dreams to support his, the nights I nursed him through sickness or comforted him through failure, the moments I silently endured his belittling remarks just to keep the peace. I remembered how, when I gave birth to our daughter, he wasn't even there because he was too busy with a work emergency, which turned out to be drinks with his colleagues. And I recalled with haunting clarity how he'd looked at me the day he told me he was leaving, with pity, as though I were some washed up relic of a life he no longer found interesting. That gaze ignited a painful flame in my chest, one that has never truly died. A pitying look is worse than an angry one because it signals that the person sees you as powerless, as something no longer worthy of respect or genuine engagement. That was what fueled me. So I decided I would show up at his wedding. The thought alone made me tremble, but I convinced myself it was the right thing to do. Not simply to humiliate him, though a part of me wanted that, but also to free myself from the cage he'd built around me, from the illusions and half truths and manipulations that somehow kept me tethered to the role of a helpless spectator. Enough was enough. I planned carefully, talking only to a few trusted people. One was my eldest daughter. She was a lawyer in training at the time, and she had mixed feelings. Mom, if he didn't finalize the divorce, then you two are still legally married. But is it worth the chaos this might cause? She asked, eyebrows pinched with concern. I took a deep breath, absorbing her worry. Was it worth it to me? Yes, it was. I needed this chance to show everyone, and maybe more importantly myself, that I was no longer the docile, worn-down woman he treated like an accessory. But there was another piece to the puzzle, the so-called real wife he was about to marry. I never wanted to hurt her. She was younger, maybe naive, maybe complicit, who knows? But she deserved the truth, and if she was hell-bent on legally binding herself to him, perhaps she should know that she was about to be a bigamist's unwitting bride. Granted, I wasn't entirely motivated by altruism. I freely admit I wanted to blow up his plan. I wanted to watch him sweat under the weight of his own lies, the same way I'd spent years suffocating in the silence of his betrayals. And so I reached out to her. I spent days agonizing about how to start the conversation. I emailed her, left a cryptic message that we needed to talk. Of course, she ignored me at first. She'd likely heard all sorts of stories about me from him, how I was crazy, unstable, jealous. Maybe she believed every word. Eventually, I cornered her at a boutique where she was shopping for some final wedding details. I recognized her from a photograph my kids had shown me once, a carefully staged snapshot with bright smiles. She looked startled, stepping away from me immediately as though I were contagious. I spoke quietly but urgently, telling her that I was still married to him, that she needed to check the official county records if she didn't believe me. Her expression was a mixture of horror and disbelief. She accused me of playing a sick game. She told me to leave her alone, tears rimming her eyes. She claimed to trust him. But I slipped a note into her hand, a business card from my law office with the relevant case number and a link. I told her to see for herself, and then I left. In the days that followed, I heard nothing, which didn't surprise me. I assumed she might have confronted him, or maybe she was too far in denial to bother verifying. But then, late one night, my phone rang. Her voice was tense, unsteady. "It's all true," she whispered, sounding shattered. She apologized for not believing me sooner. Then she said something that changed everything. "He told me you two were over, that he'd filed. He said you refused to sign. He's been lying about so many things. I I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes, remembering how many times I'd been in her position, unsure which way was up and too loyal or too entranced by his charm to think clearly. I said to her, "You do whatever is right for you, but you deserve to know what you're getting into." I expected her to vanish from my life after that call, to quietly break off the engagement or go ahead with it, but do so with her eyes wide open. Yet, in a twist I never anticipated, she reached out again, texting me in the middle of the night asking if we could meet. There was a sense of desperation in her messages, a need for clarity I recognized all too well. So we met at a coffee shop one afternoon, a quiet little place tucked away from prying eyes. The weather was gray and dreary, matching the mood in my heart. She arrived looking pale and exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that made her look less like a blushing bride and more like someone trying to piece together a puzzle that just wouldn't fit. She explained all the lies he'd told her, how he manipulated her family into thinking I was a vindictive ex who refused to move on. She showed me texts he had sent, calling me names, claiming I wanted his money, that I was a black cloud hanging over his happiness. My stomach turned as I read those words, though none of it surprised me. Then she said something that gripped my attention. He wants me to go through with the wedding, even though he knows you two are still married. He said he'll fix it afterward, that it's just a formality. But, she paused, tears welling up, I can't do it. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then, in an unsteady voice, she confessed that she felt trapped, that he'd threatened to cut her off financially, that he'd made her feel obligated to continue, that he'd humiliated her in front of certain friends when she suggested postponing. He was weaving the same net of control around her that he once placed around me. My heart ached, not just for me, but for her, for every woman who's ever been caught in that labyrinth of emotional and psychological manipulation. I reached out, placing a hand on hers gently, and said, "You have a choice." She nodded, tears dripping onto the table. She told me she wanted out, but was terrified. She feared the backlash, feared what people would say, feared he'd ruin her reputation or that her own family would think she was just being dramatic. It was a fear I understood deeply, because walking away from him was never as simple as one might think. He had a talent for twisting stories, for making you the villain in every chapter. I squeezed her hand again, and that's when the idea formed, half-baked in my mind at first. I didn't even voice it for several minutes, unsure if it was too wild to consider, but it stayed there, pulsing in my imagination. Finally, I told her, "He wanted me at his wedding. Perhaps it's time we give him exactly what he wants." The flicker of confusion in her eyes told me she wasn't sure what I meant. So I explained. The wedding was only a week away. In that time, she could pretend to go along with his plans, keep up appearances for her family and his. I would do the same, quietly, as though I were simply attending out of some bizarre sense of courtesy. But then, on the actual day, we would arrive together, we would show everyone the truth, no big announcements or dramatic speeches, just two women stepping into the light side by side, unraveling the tapestry of his lies with our very presence. I knew it was a bold plan, and part of me worried it would backfire, but I saw her eyes spark with a new sense of purpose as she imagined the scenario. "And then what?" she asked. "Then you walk away. You leave him standing there to explain himself. And me? I'll be free." I said it with a confidence I didn't entirely feel, but I needed to believe it was possible. She nodded slowly, still overwhelmed, but no longer looking as defeated. For the next week, we kept in touch only through discreet messages. She pretended everything was normal, allowing him to finalize the preparations. I waited for the backlash, half expecting him to spring some legal trap on me or find a way to force me into signing the divorce papers in a hurry. But he didn't. I suspect he was arrogant enough to believe I wouldn't dare stir trouble at his big day. He never truly understood me. He never saw me as a human being with agency, so that arrogance would be his undoing. Meanwhile, I wrestled with my own nerves. Night after night, I lay awake, replaying the potential outcomes in my head. What if he lashed out? What if he turned violent? He never had physically hurt me before, but his capacity for emotional cruelty was boundless. I thought about my children. Would they be there feeling torn between parents? Would they resent me for creating a scene? I tried to make peace with all these unknowns, telling myself I had to see this through. On the morning of the wedding, I dressed in a simple but elegant outfit, something that made me feel dignified, not overshadowing a bride, yet still exuding confidence. I did my hair carefully, taking a moment to look in the mirror, searching for the woman I used to be before he chipped away at my spirit. My reflection looked older, yes, with lines around my eyes that spoke of pain and endurance, but there was a steely determination there that I admired. I drove to the wedding venue, heart pounding, feeling as though the entire world had narrowed to this one impending confrontation. The venue was a lavish estate, all manicured lawns and flowering arches. Guests mingled in their finery, sipping champagne, laughing as though attending the social event of the season. I recognized some of them: old colleagues, mutual friends who'd taken his side. A few cast me curious glances, possibly wondering why I was there. He must have told them all sorts of stories, no doubt painting me as someone who couldn't let go. I held my head high, ignoring the stares. Then I spotted her across the courtyard, standing near a marble fountain. She wore a white dress, simple, unassuming. She'd told me she'd refused the fancy gown he wanted, claiming a last-minute mishap, though I suspect she simply no longer wanted to celebrate the occasion. She caught my eye and offered a trembling smile. We walked toward each other, silent, a hush seeming to fall over the immediate group of onlookers. I linked my arm through hers, and together we stepped into the main ceremony area, a place lined with rows of chairs, a flower-laden arch at the front. He stood there, flanked by the officiant, looking every bit the triumphant groom in his tailored suit. But as soon as he saw us, his confident posture faltered. I could see the color drain from his face, and for a moment, it was as though time slowed down. Our audience froze, mouths agape, uncertain what was happening. We kept walking, unhurried, letting the moment speak for itself. Then came the murmurs, the gasps, the sideways glances of confusion. Someone whispered, "Is it his ex-wife? Why is she with the bride?" Another said, "I thought they were divorced ages ago." The tension built like a storm about to break. He took a step forward, face contorting in anger and fear. "What are you doing?" he hissed, trying to keep his voice down, but it carried on the hush. She looked at him, eyes brimming with tears, but also defiance. "I know everything," she said. "You lied." Everyone around us seemed collectively to hold their breath. My heart hammered. This was the moment. I spoke softly but clearly. "We're still married, you and I." "You never filed the final decree, so how exactly were you planning to marry her today?" A ripple of disbelief coursed through the crowd. I heard someone cry out in shock. The officiant looked mortified, stammering something about how this wasn't legal. His mother, who was seated in the front row, covered her mouth in horror. Meanwhile, he just stared at me, fury radiating in his eyes. "Why couldn't you just let me go?" he snapped. "Why did you have to do this?" I felt a surge of emotion, remembering all the nights I'd sat alone, feeling worthless, remembering the way he smirked as he turned his back on me. With steady resolve, I answered, "Because I already let you go a long time ago, but you wouldn't let me live in peace. You strung me along, kept me in limbo, and lied to everyone." "Enough is enough." She spoke up then, voice trembling but firm. "And I don't want to marry a man who would do this to someone, who would lie so easily. I deserve better." Her words reverberated, and for a second I saw a flash of regret in his eyes, or maybe just embarrassment. He looked around, realizing all eyes were on him. Some guests were pulling out their phones, recording. I sensed the wave of public humiliation crashing down on him. He tried to salvage the situation, stammering excuses about how it was an oversight, that he meant to finalize the divorce, but the paperwork got lost. But everyone saw through his charade. He had nowhere to hide, his carefully curated persona unraveling under the collective gaze. That was the moment I felt something shift inside me, a sense of closure, a release from the suffocating grip of his manipulations. In that public arena, under the glow of embarrassment shining on him, I reclaimed my voice and my sense of self. The bride, the woman who would have been his new wife, turned and walked away, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her head held high. I watched her go, and though my chest ached for her pain, I felt proud of her for breaking free. Chaos ensued among the guests. He tried to follow her, but she brushed him off, telling him she'd never trust him again. She looked back at me once, offered a sad smile, then disappeared into the crowd. It was done. Security approached, uncertain how to handle the spectacle. The officiant apologized to the guests and declared the ceremony over. A hush of confusion and scandal spread like wildfire, everyone talking in frantic tones, some scanning for the bride, others glaring at me as though I'd ruined a party. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt liberated. It wasn't just about humiliating him, though. I'd be lying if I said that wasn't a satisfying byproduct. It was about breaking the cycle of lies, about finally standing up for myself in a world that kept telling me to be quiet. I walked out, ignoring the stares, ignoring the gossip. Once I got to my car, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands were shaking, adrenaline surging through my veins, and a sudden wave of tears escaped my eyes. They were tears of relief, fear, triumph, sadness. Everything I'd bottled up came rushing out. It was over. The confrontation, the illusions, the twisted dance. Over the following days, the fallout was immense. He tried to call me, leave messages veering between threats and pleas. He called our children, spouting his side of the story, trying to sow doubt in their minds. But the tide had turned. They were old enough to understand the truth now, especially since their father's public fiasco had been laid bare. They came to me, uncertain, but I told them everything with honesty. I didn't sugarcoat my own flaws or the ways I might have contributed to the breakdown of our marriage, but I also showed them the documents, the undeniable evidence of his deception. My eldest daughter, the one studying law, was furious. She wanted to file charges, to make him accountable for the emotional and financial burdens he'd placed on me. I considered it, but a part of me just wanted to move forward, put the entire mess behind me. The bride, well, the would-be bride, reached out one last time to thank me. We met again, this time in a calmer, less tumultuous setting, and she confided that she was leaving for a while, going to stay with relatives in another state to get away from the gossip and the reminders of what almost happened. She looked different, wiser, sadder, but also resolved. Before she left, she hugged me and said, "I'm sorry you had to go through all this, but I'm glad you did what you did." I hugged her back, tears stinging my eyes, and told her we both deserved to be free. After that, she was gone. And as for him, well, his high-profile position took a hit when rumors spread, and apparently some shady financial dealings he'd kept hidden came to light during the fiasco. The last I heard, he was trying to salvage his reputation, but you can't build a stable life on the rubble of lies. As for me, I decided it was time to truly move on. I had the legal backing to finalize the divorce for real this time, and I made sure every last detail was buttoned up. Freed from his manipulative tangles, I slowly began to rediscover my own identity. No longer the scorned wife, no longer the background character in his self-absorbed narrative, but a woman with her own life to live. I started working more confidently at the law office, eventually taking courses to become a paralegal. I traveled a bit, visited relatives I'd neglected, reconnected with old friends who told me I seemed reborn. And maybe I was, because the day I stood next to the bride in that courtyard, I proved to myself that I wasn't just some powerless figure. I may have been dismissed, betrayed, belittled, but I found my voice, my strength in exposing his truth in a way he never anticipated. I think often about that final moment, the look on his face as the reality of his lies imploded. Sometimes I feel a pang of guilt. Did I go too far, stooping to his level? But then I remember how many nights I cried myself to sleep, feeling like I was trapped in a maze of manipulation. I remember the sting of his dismissive words, his blatant disregard for my well-being and dignity. And I realized that sometimes you have to confront the darkness head on to find the light again. For a long while, I had recurring dreams of that wedding scene, always from different angles, sometimes with different outcomes. In some versions, I was too scared to speak up, and I watched him place a ring on her finger as the crowd cheered. In others, I screamed at him in anger, and he lashed out violently. But in every dream, there was a sense of finality, a recognition that whatever transpired in that moment set me on a new path. Waking from those dreams, I often felt both shaken and relieved, reminding myself that I did, in fact, take a stand. And that was enough to soothe the lingering dread. My children, especially the younger ones, took time to understand the complexities, but eventually they came to see that I wasn't the villain of the story. They watched me grow stronger, more self reliant. They apologized for the times they doubted me, though I told them they had no reason to be sorry. He'd woven such a convincing story that anyone would have been fooled. I think they learned a powerful lesson too, that sometimes the truth is messy, painful, and inconvenient. But it's still the truth, and it always finds its way to the surface. In quiet moments, I try to reflect on the entire ordeal. I notice how betrayal can carve deep wounds, but also how healing can begin when you stop letting fear dictate your choices. Betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the threshold of a new beginning if you dare to push back. I dared. I still remember the sensation of my heart pounding so fiercely that day I marched down that aisle, arm in arm with the bride, letting the entire world gasp at the sight. I can still smell the fresh flowers that lined the pathway, see the alarm on the officiant's face, and feel the tension in the air like an electric current. It's a memory that's etched into me forever, but it's not a haunting one. It's a testament to my ability to choose myself, finally. I don't know where life will take him now, and I don't really care. Perhaps he'll try to con someone else or vanish into obscurity. For my part, I feel a sense of peace in knowing I didn't just lie down and let him walk over me again. I showed up at his wedding, uninvited by any sense of goodwill, but invited by his own vanity. And I revealed exactly who held the real power in that moment. And with that act, I set both myself and his would-be bride free. Looking back, it's almost poetic. He wanted me at his wedding, so I arrived as his real wife, not some pathetic has-been, but a woman unafraid to demand the truth. And though it was a painful spectacle, it was also the turning point that allowed me to step out of the darkness of his shadow and into a life that was fully, finally, my own. When I think about the oak tree again, that symbol of our old family home, I remember how I used to stand beneath its branches, dreaming of a long, peaceful future with him, dreams of rocking chairs and grandchildren, of summer barbecues and holiday celebrations. Those dreams withered when he betrayed me, but maybe that oak tree stands as a reminder of the resilience I carry now, the deep roots I've grown. I was so afraid that losing him would mean losing everything. But I discovered that sometimes losing someone who never valued you in the first place is the greatest gift you can receive. Because in the space of their absence, you can finally see your own worth, unfettered by their distortions. It hasn't been easy. There have been days when I felt the weight of loneliness, the persistent ache of betrayal, and the complicated web of shared history that can never fully be erased. But I keep moving forward. I focus on my own growth, on forging meaningful connections with people who respect and value me, and on reminding myself that I deserve joy as much as anyone else. And there's a quiet power in waking up each morning with that knowledge. Sometimes, in the early hours when dawn is just creeping over the horizon, I reflect on how far I've come. The memory of him no longer dominates my thoughts, though it lingers like a distant echo. It's a piece of my past, not the defining chord of my future. And every day, I choose how to use the freedom I fought so hard to reclaim. I choose to fill my life with genuine relationships, to pursue goals that once felt out of reach, to laugh without restraint and cry when I need to, without shame. I choose not to let bitterness consume me, though I'd be lying if I said I never felt the sting of resentment. I also know that holding on to that pain would only give him more control. And I'm done surrendering my control to someone who never cared enough to treat me with basic decency. People still talk about that wedding fiasco sometimes, especially in the small circles where our names pop up. I hear the rumors and the retellings. Some distort the facts, turning me into a vindictive she-devil. Others frame me as a heroic figure who toppled a manipulative groom. The truth is probably somewhere in between. I was a woman pushed beyond her limit who decided enough was enough. If that makes me a villain in some stories, so be it. If it makes me a hero in others, well, I never asked for that role either. I simply did what I felt I had to do to free myself from the suffocating grip of his deception, and ironically, that action also freed the young woman he was about to trap. I like to believe she's found a better path for herself. I still keep her in my prayers, hoping she's healed from the betrayal and learned, as I did, that one's worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to manipulate or discard us. Looking at my life now, I see a tapestry of experiences. Some threads are dark with sorrow, some are stained with betrayal, but others shimmer with the luminous colors of resilience and renewal. If someone had told me years ago that I'd gain this sense of empowerment by exposing my husband's duplicity at his own wedding, I might have laughed in disbelief. But reality has a way of unraveling the best laid plans, especially when lies and secrets are at the core. He built his plan on a foundation of deceit, and I was the unacknowledged pillar he thought he'd quietly removed. Yet he never removed me. He just pretended I didn't exist. He forgot I was still standing, that I was still the legal wife, and that I still had a voice. And it was that voice he so grossly underestimated. In the aftermath, as I moved forward legally, I was surprised by how smoothly the real divorce proceedings went once everything was out in the open. He signed the papers almost immediately, perhaps too embarrassed to drag it out any longer. The settlement wasn't lavish, but it was fair, and it allowed me to rebuild my life without the weight of financial insecurity. I got the official decree in the mail, and when I read the words, it felt like a final door slamming on that part of my life. I still keep that document in a safe place, not out of sentimental attachment, but as a reminder that I can close chapters and start anew. My children have adjusted. They split their time as they see fit, though these days they prefer to stay primarily with me. They've each found their own way of relating to their father. Some barely speak to him, others maintain a cautious relationship. I respect their choices, never pushing them to fully cut him off, because I understand the complexity of parental bonds. But I also don't hide the truth from them. They're free to see the situation for what it is and draw their own conclusions. Over time, I've become closer with my siblings again, and even with a few old friends who had drifted away during the chaos of my marriage. Reconnecting with them has been healing, reminding me of the person I was before I let him overshadow my existence. They tell me I laugh more easily now, that my eyes shine with a light they thought was extinguished. It touches me to hear that, to realize that somewhere along this painful road, I've rediscovered joy. The house we once shared is long sold. I moved into a smaller place with a cozy garden where I can plant flowers and watch them grow without the gloom of old memories haunting me at every turn. Each morning I tend to the garden, reveling in the simple pleasure of nurturing life from the soil. It's become symbolic for me, a living metaphor for how I've cultivated my own sense of self after years of neglect. I think about that bride sometimes, wonder if she has found real love or if she's still searching, still healing. I wonder if she ever thinks of me, if she's grateful or resentful. But I suppose it doesn't matter. We crossed paths for a reason, and in that brief crossing, we shattered his web of deceit. That was enough. And for him, my soon to be ex husband, who once shone so brightly in my eyes, the memory has faded. I don't nurture hatred for him. There's only a dull sadness at the waist, the realization that he could never be honest enough to nurture the love we once might have had. But I've learned that not every relationship is meant to last, and some exist purely to teach us how strong we can be when we're forced to face the unimaginable. If there's any lingering bitterness, it's overshadowed by the gratitude I have for my own awakening. for the second chance at living an authentic life. At times, I reflect on the little things, how he used to talk down to me in front of his friends, how he never thought my ideas or ambitions mattered. It's sobering to realize how long I tolerated it, how deeply I'd internalized the belief that I wasn't worth more. But now I see that quietly strong part of myself was always there, like an ember buried under cold ash. I found a way to let it blaze when I stepped forward that day, linking arms with his almost bride. I can still feel the adrenaline, the trembling in my limbs, the hush that fell over the gathering as we came into view. Hmm. It was terrifying and empowering all at once, a definitive moment where the truth stood unmasked. And it's that moment I cling to, not because of the drama it caused, but because it was the birth of a new chapter in my life where I refuse to let anyone else define me or my worth. And in the final analysis, that's what truly matters. People can say whatever they want, they can rewrite the narrative in their own heads, but I know what happened. I know how I felt, and I know the courage it took to stand there, vulnerable yet unwavering, under the gaze of everyone who had once believed I was nothing more than a forgotten ex wife. I used to believe he held all the power, that it was his story and I was just a footnote. But that day proved me wrong. Because when he wanted me at his wedding, I showed up, not as a cameo in his triumph, but as the undeniable fact that he hadn't broken me, nor had he freed himself from the consequences of his actions. And in doing so, I reclaimed my own narrative. It's mine now, and nothing he does can take that away. My life has flourished since then. I've found hobbies that fill my days with meaning: painting, volunteering at a local shelter, spending time with people who genuinely appreciate my company. My children see a mother who no longer sighs in disappointment every time their father's name comes up, who no longer drowns in regret or self-pity. They see a woman who walked through fire and emerged stronger, even if scarred. And for them, I'm thankful, because I want them to understand that heartbreak is not the end, that being betrayed doesn't have to define who you are. Sometimes I catch them watching me with a new kind of respect, and it warms my heart to know they're learning resilience and self-worth from my experience. Maybe it will help them avoid similar traps in their own relationships. It's strange how something so devastating can lead to growth. That wedding, which could have been one of the darkest days of my life, turned into a moment of rebirth. I've stopped dwelling on the question of why he did it, why he kept me in the dark, why he lied to me, to her, to everyone. Some questions don't have satisfying answers, and life is too short to remain tangled in the why. I prefer focusing on the what now. And the what now is a beautiful expanse of possibilities. No more strings attached, no more illusions. Just me standing on my own 2 feet, weaving a future that resonates with who I truly am. Once in a while, I'll hear a snippet of gossip about him, how he's trying to date again, how he complains about how unfair I was, that I ruined his life. But I just smile, because I know the truth. I didn't ruin his life. I just refused to let him keep ruining mine. There's a big difference. If he wants to paint me as the villain, let him. The people who matter know the real story, and those who don't matter can cling to their own illusions. After all, illusions and half-truths were always his domain, not mine. He can keep living in that realm if he chooses. As for me, I choose reality, the raw, bittersweet reality that comes with heartbreak and healing, with loneliness and newfound companionship, with loss and empowerment. I've had a few tentative steps into dating again, and while it's early, I feel a world of difference in how I see myself, how I communicate my needs and boundaries. I won't settle for anything less than respect and honesty. And if that means I remain single for a while, that's fine. Because I'm happy with my own company in a way I never was before. In the quiet hours of the night, I sometimes revisit the memory of that wedding day with surprising fondness. It marked the moment I finally turned the page, not with polite civility or hidden tears, but with a thunderous revelation that I deserved better, that I was, in fact, stronger than his manipulations. And that even if it took years for me to find my voice, once found, that voice was a powerful thing. Maybe that's the ultimate lesson in all of this. No one can take your voice unless you hand it over. For too long, I handed mine over, passively allowing him to shape my narrative. But once I snatched it back, he was powerless, and the rest played out like an old rotten tower collapsing under the weight of its own deceit. The final blessing, as I see it now, was the solidarity I found with the bride. Two women who, under other circumstances, might have seen each other as rivals, instead came together to stand against manipulation. There was sisterhood in that moment, an unspoken bond that transcended the pain he inflicted. For one brief moment, we locked arms, two scorned women facing the source of our betrayal head on. I still smile at the poetic fustice in that act. In a way, that was the sweetest triumph, turning his controlling narrative on its head by uniting with the person he thought he could use to replace me. That synergy of betrayed women was something he never counted on, and it was precisely his undoing. In the years that have passed, I've learned to be gentle with myself about the past. Sometimes people ask if I wish I'd done things differently, if I wish I'd confronted him sooner or divorced him the moment I suspected his betrayal, perhaps. But I also understand that we do the best we can with the information we have at the time. I wasn't weak for staying as long as I did. I was hopeful, trusting, and yes, a bit naive. That doesn't diminish my worth. It just means I was human. And in the end, I found the courage to stand up for myself, which is what truly matters. He wanted me at his wedding, perhaps to flaunt his new life in front of me, to show me how easily he could move on without me. But he got far more than he bargained for. He got the unveiling of his double life, served not by some petty outburst, but by a quiet, resolute presence that spoke louder than any words. I think he'll carry that memory forever, no matter how he tries to spin it. And I hope for his own sake he learns something from it. Maybe he'll realize that you can't keep people chained in half-lives forever, that eventually the truth fights its way to the surface. But whether he learns or not is no longer my concern. My concern is my own life, my own journey, and how I can continue to grow from the soil of what once was a barren field. I've planted new seeds of possibility, and they're beginning to bloom. Life is far from perfect, but it's honest. I have days of sadness, moments where the echoes of betrayal sting like old wounds flaring in the cold. But I also have days of pure, simple joy, strolling in the park, reading a book by the fire, laughing with my children over silly jokes. Those moments remind me that I am no longer defined by the man who once overlooked my worth. I am defined by what I choose to do with my freedom day by day. And so I hold my head high, carry the lessons I've learned, and embrace whatever comes next, knowing I have the strength to face it. I survived betrayal, heartbreak, and public drama, and I emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. Scars can be a roadmap of where we've been, a testament to what we've endured. I wear mine with pride now because they led me to this place of self-discovery and liberation. In a strange twist, his invitation gave me the perfect stage to reclaim my narrative. The very moment he believed would humiliate me became the crucible that forged my renewed sense of self. Sometimes irony is the greatest teacher of all. And so as I move forward, I hold on to the truth of that moment, the truth of who I am when I refuse to be silenced. I'm a woman who was betrayed but not broken, who found solidarity in unexpected places, and who made a stand where it mattered most, right in the heart of his elaborate charade. It's a story I'll carry within me, a reminder that I have the power to write my own ending, even when someone else thinks they've penned my final chapter. Because ultimately, that's what freedom is, the right to define yourself on your own terms, to speak your truth, no matter how hard it shakes the foundations others have built. And if nothing else, I spoke. I spoke, and I will never be silent again.